Welcome everybody to Chaos this week on the Pryce Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Pryce, coming at you from Loganville, Georgia, where we cut through the noise and dive straight into the whirlwind of global events that defined the past 7 days. No fluff, no filter, just raw analysis from the stories shaking our world. This episode clocks in at 1 hour just about. So buckle up as we explore the fragile tightrope of war and peace, political earthquakes in Europe, economic pain at the pump, America's shifting demographics, and a triumphant return from the moon. Now, let's dive in. The dominant story this week. Sorry, excuse me, guys, 1 second. Sorry about that. Anywho, the dominant story of this week has been the ongoing US Iran conflict, now stretching into its sixth week, with a 2 week ceasefire announced on April 8th that remains thin. I would say very, very, very thin. President Trump accused Iran of violating the truce almost immediately, pointing to restricted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, that critical choke point carrying nearly 20% of the world's oil. Iran, for its part, has demanded tolls or maintained partial controls while insisting the agreement doesn't fully apply amid continued Israeli actions. Only about 30 ships have passed through since the ceasefire took effect, far below normal traffic, as shippers wait for clearer rules and Iran requires coordination with its forces to avoid hostile behavior. On Black Wednesday, April 8th or 9th, April 8th and leading into the 9th, Israel unleashed what reports describe as 10 minutes of terror. Hundreds of airstrikes across Beirut, the Beqaa Valley, and southern Lebanon, killing at least 303 to 357 people, including civilians and children, and injuring over 1,200. Israeli officials justified the barrage as targeting Hezbollah infrastructure under Operation Internal Darkness, rejecting broader ceasefire calls and even opening direct talks with Lebanon while widening operations in the south. This escalation risks unraveling the entire US Iran deal, which we all do not like. 100%. With Iran warning its hand remains on the trigger. Now, what trigger do they have left? We will see. And accusing the US of allowing Netanyahu to sabotage diplomacy. Lebanese officials demanded bridges that now threaten humanitarian aid flows to southern Lebanon, worsening food insecurity and displacement. Vice President JD Vance is in, and I will 100% botch this. Okay, so just deal with me, right? Islamabad, Pakistan. Actually, I don't think I botched that. Let me know in the comments. Who knows? Right now, for direct talks with Iranian officials, historic face-to-face negotiations, the first of their kind since 1979 Islamic Revolution, aimed at turning the temporary pause into something permanent and long-lasting. We all know that. The agenda includes fully reopening the strait, nuclear concerns, Hezbollah's. You know what I need? I need some water. That's what I need right now. down the wrong hole. Oh my gosh. Oh my. Went down the wrong hole. Hold up. Ooh, sorry about that, guys. Almost died. Water went down the wrong hole. Ooh. Anywho, the agenda includes fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz, nuclear concerns, Hezbollah's role, and potentially the release of blocked Iranian assets. Ooh. Guys, do not breathe in while you're drinking. Oh my gosh. Man, that was not fun. That was not fun. Whew. Pakistan is playing a key meditating role, hosting trilateral meetings with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Nuances around here. The ceasefire emerged after immense back channel efforts and Iran's 10-point proposal, which Trump called a workable starting point. Yet, trust is razor thin on all sides. Iran's negotiating team appears fragmented, with competing voices. Oh my. Yeah. Don't breathe while you're drinking water. Drink the water. Yeah. Anywho, Iran's negotiating team appears fragmented with competing voices from diplomats, the IRGC, and hardliners sending mixed signals. Trump has repeatedly threatened complete demolition of Iranian power plants and bridges if shipping doesn't normalize. While allies worry about broader regional spillover, some analysts argue both sides were exhausted from the costs. economic pain, military losses, and political fatigue, making de escalation logical, but implementation remains murky without a clear written agreement. Oh my gosh. Now consider the implications from multiple angles. Economically, the partial closure has spiked global oil prices and added ripple effects hitting everything from shipping costs and insurance premiums to customer goods and airline fuel supercharges. Militarily, downed aircraft, intercepted missiles over Jordan and Kuwait, and strikes on Iranian sites, including a petrochemical complex, highlight how quickly this could reignite into full scale fighting. Humanitarily, the Lebanon death toll and infrastructure damage underscore the civilian cost, raising serious questions about proportionality, international law, and long term regional stability. The strikes have severed key bridges over the Litani River, limiting access to aid, food, and healthcare for tens of thousands. Edge cases include a full straight reopening, stabilizing markets, and easing inflation pressures versus prolonged restrictions, fueling a deeper global energy crisis. Another scenario, ground operations or expanded Israeli actions, drawing into more actors like Russia, which already excavated staff from Iranians' Bushehr nuclear plant, or even China increasing arms shipments to Iran. What if proxy groups in Iraq or Yemen exploit the am, ambiguity? I hope I say that right. Ambiguity to launch attacks, testing the ceasefire's undefined scope. From a U.S. domestic lens, House Republicans blocked Democratic efforts for wars. Oh my God, sorry, one second. Whew. Yeah, don't drink water while you breathe. Not fun. Not fun whatsoever. from a U.S. Democratic, from a U.S. domestic lens, House Republicans blocked Democratic efforts for a war powers resolution limiting Trump's authority. The fourth, the fourth such attempt. This reflects deep partisan divides over executive war making, congressional oversight, and the balance between national security and constitutional checks. Broader considerations. How does this affect energy security for Europe and Asia, both heavily reliant on Gulf oil? What role do proxy groups and non state actors play in derailing fragile deals? And if talks in Pakistan fail this weekend, could we see renewed strikes on civilian infrastructure, escalating the humanitarian crisis and refugee flows? Mm, mm, mm. There's also the risk of miscalculation. Fragmented Iranian decision making could lead to accidental violations, while domestic US politics might push for harder lines ahead for future elections. The coming days in Islamabad will test further diplomacy can prevail over escalation. Will Vance secure concrete commitments on Hormuz and Lebanon? Or will deferring interceptions of the ceasefire doom the process? Success could mark a rare off ramp in a volatile region. Failure might prolong economic pain at home and instability abroad. Either way, this week underscores how interconnected modern conflicts have become. Military actions in one theater instantly ripple through global markets, alliances, and humanitarian realities. And while the Middle East dominates headlines, Europe faces its own reckoning. Hungarians head to the polls this Sunday, April 12th, in a preliminary election that could fundamentally end Viktor Orban's 16-year grip on power. Recent polls shows the Fed, blah, 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 Fedists, I guess how you pronounce it. Look, guys, if I botch these words, these names, sorry, all I can say, sorry, it's gonna happen. Anywho, this party is trailing as much as 12 to 18 points behind the center right pro EU Tiska party led by Peter Magyar, a former Orban insider and ally who dramatically broke ranks 2 years ago, positioning himself as a reformer fighting corruption and democratic backsliding. Projections suggest Tiza could secure not just a simple majority, but a two-thirds supermajority, which would allow constitutional changes, judicial reforms, and the unlocking of billions in frozen EU funds that have been withheld since 2022 over rule of law concerns. Water's still trying to get out of my lungs. JD Vance campaigned alongside Orban early in this week in Budapest, delivering a high profile joint appearance that signaled continued U.S. support for certain right leaning, sovereignty focused figures, even as broader transatlantic frictions intensifies. This comes at a sensitive moment. Trump has openly floated the idea of pulling the US out of NATO or drastically reducing commitments, particularly as European leaders sharply criticize the US handling of the Iran conflict and Israel's recent strikes in Lebanon. Multiple reports this week have asked whether the US and Europe are drifting toward a significant breakup on security policy, trade priorities, energy strategy, and core democratic values. Let's explore this from different perspectives. For pro EU voices and liberal reformers in Hungary, a decisive TISA victory will mark a major realignment toward Brussels, potentially strengthening coordinated migration controls at the EU's external borders, while potentially strengthening coordinated migration coordinated migration controls at the EU's external borders while advancing deeper economic and political integration. It could also weaken the broader advancing deeper sorry, hold on. It could also weaken the broader populist bloc against Central and Eastern Europe. On the other side, Orban supporters framed the election as an existential defense of Hungarian national sovereignty against what they call globalist pressures from Brussels, including mandatory migrant quotas, progressive social policies, and perceived threats to traditional Christian values and family structures. Many voters credit Orban for keeping Hungary out of the worst of the 2015-2016 migration crisis and protecting its cultural identity. But nuances matter here. Hungary's electoral system heavily favors the largest party through a complex mix of proportional and majoritarian districts, meaning even a strong but divided opposition could still hand Teza a supermajority. Turnout expectations are unusually high. Some analytics predict over 70%, driven by intense polarization. Interestingly, the role of football in Orban's cultural politics, once a major strength through massive stadium investments and national team support, now appears as a potential vulnerability. Critics have highlighted the billions spent on sports infrastructure while accusing the government of neglecting healthcare and education. The implications stretch far beyond Budapest. The TISA led government could ease ongoing EU migration debates by cooperating more closely on border security, yet it might stimulously strain relations from Washington if anti NATO or anti American rhetoric grows louder among European elites. Edge cases are worth considering. If Middle East instability worsens and sends new waves of refugees into Europe, a pro EU Hungary might actually become more restrictive on migration to maintain domestic support, creating ironic tensions. Economically, any realignment could trigger ripple effects from shifts in EU funding flows to changes in energy deals with Russia or alternative suppliers amid the Gulf distributions. Related considerations include the fact that EU efforts to manage arrivals have struggled for years. Man, it has been years. Migration is a problem over there. Please fix it. While repeated U.S. criticism of European defense spending, often below 2% GDP target, continues to add fuel to the transatlantic fire. This week's development highlights how seemingly domestic elections now echo globally. A Hungarian shift could test whether the tide of populism that rose in the 2010s is truly turning or whether it is simply reshaping itself into new forms. Success for TISA might encourage similar anti-incumbent movements in neighboring countries, while Orban comeback against the polls could reinforce narratives of resilient sovereignty politics. Either outcome will send signals to Washington, Brussels, and beyond about the future of alliances in an increasingly fragmented world, especially as the Middle East crisis especially as the Middle East crisis forces Europe to confront its own energy vulnerabilities and sec, oh my gosh, words are so hard. Sheesh, security dependencies. Man, sometimes sometimes the English language is kind of hard, not gonna lie. But back to the US. The Iran's conflict economic fallout hits wallets hard. National average gas prices hovered around 416 to 417 per gallon this week, up nearly a full dollar from pre-war levels, with some states topping $5 and diesel climbing even higher, sometimes exceeding 550 in parts of California and in the Northeast. Here in Georgia, drivers in the Atlanta metro and rural areas around Loganville are feeling it acutely, with regular unleaded averaging 412 to 425, depending on the station. The fragile ceasefire brought a brief wave of optimism on Wall Street, with crude futures dropping sharply as much as $4 to $6 a barrel in a single session. Yet, analysts warn that meaningful relief at the pump could lag 10 to 14 days more. Prices may not fall dramatically without full sustained normalization of the Strait of Hormuz because refiners, distributors, and retainers all build in buffers for uncertainty. Companies like Amazon, JetBlue, and several major trucking firms quickly added energy shortages, openly calling it a war tax on consumers and businesses. These fees are showing up on everything from next day delivery costs to airfare and freight rates. Inflation data released this week showed March consumers' prices rising 3.3% year over year, the highest in nearly 2 years, with energy costs as the primary driver. Core inflation, which strips out food and energy, remains sticky at 2.8%, signaling that the pain is spreading beyond the pump. Slower U.S. economic growth in the last 2 quarters compounds this problem. Small businesses, especially in logistics, agriculture, and retail, are struggling to pass on higher costs and already tight margins, forcing many to absorb the hit, cut hours, or delay hiring. Let's examine this from multiple angles. Optimists argue that if the truce holds and the strait reopens fully, we could see pump prices drop 10 to 15 cents in the coming weeks, possibly pushing the national average back below $4 within a month as summer driving season begins. Skeptics counter that even with de escalation, the summer travel surge, hurricane season risks in the Gulf, and lingering geopolitical volatility could keep prices stubbornly elevated while into June or July. Nuances include sharp regional variations. Drivers in oil producing states like Texas or North Dakota may see faster relief, while import dependent areas like the Northeast and parts of the West Coast feel the pinch. Here in Georgia, with its heavy reliance on trucking for agriculture and manufacturing, the increase translate directly into higher food and goods prices at local stores. There's also an under-discussed intersection with immigration and labor policy. Reduced immigration flows have tightened the labor market in sectors like trucking, warehousing, and refining, while shortages were already pushing up wages. This makes it harder for businesses to absorb cost shocks or expand capacity quickly, potentially slowing any economic recovery. Broader implications touch everything from household budgets, where families are now forced to choose between filling the tank and stocking the fridge, to complex global supply chains that are rerouting shipments and increasing insurance premiums. We also face bigger questions about entitlement sustainability, amid ongoing demographic shifts with an aging population and slower workforce growth. Higher energy costs strain with everything from Social Security funding to state transportation budgets. Edge cases are worth considering. A prolonged conflict or renewed disruptions could reignite sharp price spikes well above $5 nationally. While truthfully, while truly successful talks in Pakistan could accelerate the return to sub $4 gas and ease inflationary pressure. On the fiscal side, US debt now exceeds $39 trillion, adds another layer of vulnerability. Easily sustained increase in borrowing costs or defense spending related to the conflict marks makes future budget battles even more continuous. Debates are already raging in Washington about whether these war-related economic costs will haunt the administration and Republicans in the upcoming midterms. This isn't abstract economics. It's concrete and personal. It's families in Loganville and across Georgia deciding which bills to delay, farmers calculating whether to pass higher diesel costs onto consumers, and small business owners rethinking logistics, routes, and hiring plans. The ripple effect the ripple effects of decisions made halfway around the world are landing directly in American driveways and grocery aisles right now. And amid the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and economic pain at the gas pump, quieter but profoundly important shifts have been emerging in U.S. demographics. New analysis released this week highlights continued drops in fertility rates and overall population growth, raising serious alarms about future workforce sustainability. Social Security and Medicare strains, housing markets, and America's long term capacity for innovation and economic competitiveness. This is not a sudden development. It's a It's a multi year trend that has been accelerating. The US total fertility rate has now fallen approximately to 1.62 births per woman, well below the replacement level of 2.1. Births have declined in 2025 and early 2026, influenced by a combination of high living costs, delayed family formation among millennials and Gen Z, shifting cultural norms around marriage and parenthood, and lingering effects from the pandemic and recent economic uncertainty. Immigration policy has become an even more pivotal variable in this equation, especially as enforcement has intensified. Data this week shows net migration potentially turning low or even negative in 2026 for the first time in decades. Hallelujah. Broader border encounters have plummeted dramatically compared to previous years. I would say they've been dropped from between 95 to 99%, which is great. While interior enforcement has ramped up, we've seen high-profile cases such as a father detained by immigration authorities while rushing to the hospital to meet his premature newborn. Stories that illustrate the human side of these policies. In a separate development, a federal judge postponed the determination of protected status for certain Ethiopian immigrants amid ongoing Supreme Court challenges to broader immigration and asylum frameworks. Now, let's consider the nuances carefully. And I mean very carefully, okay? Reduced immigration does slow overall job growth in many sectors, but it has not produced the expected surge in labor force participation among native born Americans, as some policymakers had hoped. Fertility declines are now compounding on aging population. The share of Americans the share of Americans over 65 continue to rise, putting increasing pressures on healthcare systems, pension programs, and housing markets already strained by high costs. From an economic perspective, this combination could lead to persistent labor shortages in critical industries like healthcare, construction, agriculture, and manufacturing. Shortages that drive up wages in some areas but also raise business costs and slow growth. On the other hand, scarcity can sometimes spark necessity driven innovation as companies invest more heavily in automation, AI, and productivity enhancing technologies. Socially and politically, the debate is sharp as a knife, as a katana, sharp as something that's very sharp. Proponents of stricter immigration policies argue it protects American workers and encourages higher birth rates through family support incentives. Now, I'm gonna take a pause and just say this: if you want more families, more people being able, to have kids, um, and the feminism to completely just destroy feminism, we don't need it right now. 100%. Women should focus more on building a family when they get more honestly the moment they get out of high school. Really, focus on starting a family. Yes, you could go to college. Okay, that's fine. That's great. Go to college, get some education. While you're in college, you should find a guy. You know, somebody you would want to have kids with. Just saying. Um, and yeah, you know, there's data out there, surveys that show that there are more men who want to have a family, like young men who want to have a family, start a family, while the females don't. Well, so it's a mindset thing. You got to change the mindset, which ultimately means destroy feminism. End of debate. Now, some other ways to increase it, government side, you could give them tax cuts, give families tax cuts. You know, newlyweds could get tax cuts for maybe the first 5 years of newlyweds, if they and then They have a kid, give them incentives, tax-based incentives. What they look like, I don't know. I really don't know. I haven't really done a whole deep dive. I'll have to think about it a lot more. But these are just ideas that I'm just thinking about on the spot, honestly, that could help with the fertility crisis and to really get the economy back up. Just a few things, right? Try to get the fertility rate back up to above 2.1. I wanted to see it at where it's at 2.4, really, at the very least. But yeah, critics consider that without sufficient inflows, we risk a slower growing economy that ultimately makes it harder to fund entitlements and supports an aging society. Edge cases are particularly concerning. An accelerated workforce contraption could force earlier and deeper reforms to Social Security and Medicare, potentially through higher retirement ages or reduced benefits. Conservatively, sudden policy reversals, such as expanded legal immigration pathways or new family incentives, could spur demographic rebound. Though such shifts often take years to materially affect fertility or labor supply. That is why this negative trend is very, very, very frightening. We need to do we need to start this thing now because it takes time for everything to go back to be to the positive, right? So yeah, it takes time. That's why we gotta gotta do this, right? These demographic trends do not exist in isolation. They intersect directly with the current Iran conflict and economic pressures we've discussed. Higher energy costs and inflation make family formation even more expensive for young Americans, while labor shortages in logistics and refining, sectors already feeling the war's ripple effects, become more acute when immigration slows. Regionally, the impacts vary widely. In places like Portland, Oregon, debates over climate funds and resource allocation are increasingly shaped by an aging, slower growing population that demands different priorities in infrastructure and social services. In growing Sunbelt states like Georgia, the balance between workforce needs and housing pressures creates unique local tensions. Long term, how America adapts to these demographic realities will profoundly shape its global competitiveness. A shrinking or slower growing labor force could limit our ability to outpace rivals in technology, defense, and economic output. Success will likely require a balanced approach, thoughtful incentives to encourage higher birth rates, smarter legal immigration policies that address genuine labor gaps, and investments in education and workforce development. Failure to address these shifts thoughtfully risks a future of slower growth, strained public finances, and diminished influence on the world stage. This quieter story may not dominate cable news the way missiles and oil prices do, but its consequences could prove even more lasting than anything. That's what I said beforehand. Give tax incentives to families. Newlyweds, I believe, should get tax cuts. First 5 years, tax cuts. Well, that's dependable on what type of tax cut there could be. Who knows? But we need to really encourage the nuclear family that feminism has destroyed or tried to destroy. Well, yes, that they are destroying, I will say. So, yeah, those are what I think. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and yeah. Now, in brighter news, NASA's Artemis 2 mission capped a historic week with the crew's safe Pacific splashdown off San Diego on Friday evening. Four astronauts, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cox, Coach, and Canadian Jeremy Hansen completed the first crewed lunar flyby in over 50 years, breaking multiple distance records and capturing unprecedented high resolution views of the moon's far side that had never been seen before with human eyes. Imagine that. Launched on April 1st aboard the powerful SLS rocket and the Orion spacecraft, the 10-day mission successfully tested critical systems for future lunar landings, including deep space navigation, life support, heat shield performance during re entry, and communication relays. The crew described the experience in vivid terms. Commander Reed Wiseman called the sight of the moon rising over the Earth's horizon absolutely breathtaking. That is something I want to see. Ooh. Oh man, I can imagine it right now. Yeah, that needs to happen. 100%. I want to see that. A view that changes forever. Victor Glover, the first black astronaut to fly beyond low Earth orbit, spoke of the profound perspective it gave him in our planet's fragility. Christina Koch, who previously held the longest who held the record for the longest single space flight by a woman, highlighted the emotional weight of seeing the lunar surface up close, while Jeremy Hansen, the first Canadian on a lunar mission, emphasized the international spirit of the journey. This mission builds directly on the uncrewed Artemis 1 success and represents a major milestone toward establishing a sustainable human presence on and around the moon. We are going to Mars, baby. It also showcases meaningful international collaboration with the Canadian Space Agency, providing key contributions to the Orion spacecraft. In a week filled with conflict, economic strain, and political tension, the smooth splash down offered a powerful contrast. A moment when nations work together toward a shared goal rather than against one another. It could happen, and it must happen. With China and Russia, we with our enemies, that could be talked about. It could be discussed. Okay, but yes, we can work together. We should work together. 100%. Perspectives on the mission vary widely. Optimists point to growing private sector partnership with companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Lockheed Martin as the key to accelerating process and reducing costs over time. Budget hawks, however, question the program's multi-billion-dollar price tag at a moment when the domestic priorities like gas prices, entitlements, and broader security dominate public attention. Nuances include the significant risks that were successfully overcome, from radiation exposure in deep space to the high speed re entry that subjected Orion to temperatures over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the strong inspiration value of the STEM education. Millions of students watched live feeds and mission updates, potentially sparking the next generation of engineers and scientists. The implications reach beyond space. Advances in deep space technologies often translate into practical benefits back on Earth, from improved materials science and radiation shielding that could help cancer treatment, to more efficient computing systems and propulsion technologies with commercial applications. We could be seeing floating cars here soon. Just saying. I'm just saying, okay? We could be. We could be. We could be, okay? If I start seeing a floating car, I'm gonna be like, yo, where can I get mine? Fly out, float over all these other cars. Oh man, that'd be awesome. Imagine just hovering over an accident. Oh man, that would be great. That would be great. These implications reach beyond space. 100%. They really do. Edge cases are worth noting. Any significant delay in Artemis 3, the first planned crew lunar landing, could erode public and congressional support while raising geopolitical competition in space, particularly from China's ambitious lunar program, and turn the moon into the next area of strategic rivalry rather than peaceful exploration. Which, yeah, I see that. I'd like to explore. I'm a guy. I want to explore. I want to see the unknown. We gotta, it's, we gotta get to the Star Trek times and develop warp engines, all that type of stuff. Instant traveling. Yeah, we gotta develop all that. It'd be awesome though. It'd be awesome. Amid all the chaos we've discussed this week, from fragile ceasefires and rising gas prices to political shifts and demographic challenges, the successful Artemis 2 mission serves as a timely reminder of humanity's enduring capacity for exploration, scientific achievement, and unity when we choose to reach for something greater than our immediate conflicts. And it is awesome. Peace through strength. Amazing, right? Mm. Now, rounding out the week, several important U.S. domestic stories continue to intersect with the larger global and economic trends that we have been discussing. Immigration enforcement remains a flashpoint, with intensified debates surrounding high profile detentions, ongoing DACA cases, and fresh legal challenges to birthright citizenship now heading toward the courts. We saw Poignant, we saw poignant examples this week, including reports of individuals detained while trying to reach family members in medical emergencies, highlighting the human stakes involved. At the same time, a federal judge struck down key aspects of proposed funding cuts to public media outlets like NPR and PBS, ruling that they violated free speech protections. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court issued opinions and heard arguments on issues ranging from bans on conversation theory or conversion therapy for minors to broader questions of parental rights and state authority. Conversion therapy for minors should not happen. I disagree with it. I believe that that needs to be completely banned, abolished. Really, minors should not go through conversion therapy. No, no. Anywho, other notable developments included growing speculation around future Supreme Court vacancies and potential nominations. Harvard University's consideration of stricter grade policies amid ongoing campus controversies over academic standards and student conduct, and subtle political undercurrents, such as Kamala Harris publicly hiring a prof- possible or hinting, sorry, Kamala Harris hinting publicly at possible future presidential runs in 2028. She will lose. I am sorry, but she's not winning 100%. These stories, though varied, all reflect a deep polarization in American governance today. The constant tension between protecting free speech and pursuing policy priorities, between family impacts and national security needs, and between individual liberties and collective goals. Now, let's examine this from multiple angles. Those emphasizing liberty argue that aggressive enforcement and funding decisions might not trample constitutional protections or due process. Advocates focused on security counter that strong borders and fiscal responsibility are essential for long-term stability, especially as demographic shifts and economic pressures from events like Iran conflict strain public resources. Equity perspectives highlight the need to balance humanitarian concerns with practical limits on what any single nation can absorb. Nuances emerge in the details. For instance, while reduced immigration may slow job growth in certain sectors, it has not automatically increased workforce participation among native-born citizens as hoped, creating complex ripple effects on everything from labor shortages and logistics, exaggerated by exasperated by higher fuel costs, to sustainability of entitlement programs. The implications are far-reaching. Democratic policy is increasing, shaping economic outcomes, influencing everything from GDP growth to the funding of Social Security and Medicare. Legal predec- sorry, legal precedents set in these cases could significantly expand or constrain executive power in areas ranging from immigration to public funding. Edge cases deserve attention. Successful court challenges could reshape immigration frameworks for years to come, potentially opening up new pathways or triggering backlash and stricter measures. On the other hand, stalled reforms or prolonged litigation might leave uncertainty hanging over families, businesses, and policymakers, delaying needed clarity in a time of rapid change. Mm. Taken together, these domestic threats reminds us that even as dramatic events unfold overseas, the the foundational debates happening inside the U.S. about who we are, how we govern, and how we balance competing values will ultimately determine how well the country navigates the broader chaos of our time. This week encapsulated global volatility in striking fashion. A Middle East ceasefire teetering on the edge amid Israeli strikes in Lebanon and disputes over the Strait of Hormuz. European elections that could reshape transatlantic alliances, pocketbook pain from energy shocks and rising gas prices, deepening demographic headwinds, and a hopeful lunar milestone with Artemis 2 that reminded us of humanity's greater potential. From geopolitics to economics to exploration, clear patterns emerge. The fragility of diplomacy, the resilience of nationalism, the promise of technology, and the long shadows cast by policy decisions made in Washington, Tehran, and Brussels. These stories aren't isolated. They're interconnected in ways that directly affect American families, global stability, and our shared future. As we head into the weekend with Vice President JD Vance in Pakistan for critical talks and Hungarians heading to the polls, keeping a close eye on ceasefire durability, oil market relations, economic outcomes, and any new economic ripples. Chaos persists, but understanding it from every angle better equips us to navigate these uncertain times with clarity and wisdom. Thanks for joining me on the Pryce Podcast. If you found value in this deep dive, do three things right now. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed yet, and leave a comment down below with your biggest takeaway or the story that's hit you the hardest from this week. Your thoughts help shape future episodes and keep the conversation going. This has been Jonathan Pryce, coming at you from Loganville, Georgia. Until next week, stay informed, think critically, and navigate the chaos wisely. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.